I think Pixie was definitely doing something there that's more than just what the Golden Dawn had in mind, and potentially it had a lot to do with what she was going through at that time. Hi, folks. Welcome back to Elemental Cartomancy. I'm here today because I want to do a bit of a comparison. Now, I've done comparisons between the Thoth and the RWS before. I think I've even got a comparison video between the Thoth and the Hermetic Tarot, which is what's in the middle here. Um, Previously, I've always been had this kind of a surface level view of how these systems compare. The main thing I'm going to be doing today is comparing the RWS to the Thoth and the Golden Dawn system, which is why I've got the Hermetic here, because the key phrases that are on the Hermetic Tarot, as I understand it, are the Golden Dawn key phrases. There's no changes made that I'm aware of. So it'll be good enough for the purposes of this video. Like I say, I've always kind of had a bit of a view that the Thoth and the RWS, whilst they obviously tie in certain places, they're also very different in certain places. And recently, I've kind of come to realise that actually they're not as dissimilar as what we think they are. Basically, they're both both Waite and Pixie and Aleister Crowley were all members of the Golden Dawn. So I believe that each of them have made their tarot, based off of this Golden Dawn system. Okay. Now, that you can see that there's at certain points they put their own spin on things that can't be denied, but I don't think they're as different as what I thought they were, and I don't think that they're as different as what maybe generally we tend to think they are. Why am I bothering to do this? Well, I think it's actually, I think in certain places we can look at what Pixie's drawn. We've come to have a certain impression of what the Rider-Waite-Smith cards mean. And it's just kind of been accepted over years and years. But I actually think when you look at it along with the Golden Dawn and, Crowley's system, it makes you think twice about what Pixie was actually trying to depict. And there are certain cards where, there's consistency right the way across. The first one here that I've got is the Two of Wands, and you can kind of see that there. But also, I think that there's certain cards where traditionally these days we tend to interpret them very differently. And I think it's interesting to look at it in this lens. So I've only got the Minor Arcana 2 through 10 here, okay, of each suit. So there's 36 cards here. I'm thinking this is going to be a one video because there are certain cards where we don't really need to say much. It's pretty obvious that they're all consistent. But there are other cards where, it maybe warrants a bit of thinking about. So without further ado, I guess let's get going. We can see the Two of Wands in front of us. So the Golden Dawn key phrase is the Lord of Dominion. And we can see that Crowley has taken Dominion as his key phrase on his card. I'm not sure. Dominion isn't the first thing that I think about when I read the Smith-Waite Two of Wands. I tend to read this as a planning, brainstorming, looking forward, planning ahead, planning for your own success type thing. But when I think about this picture with Dominion in mind, I can see how that relates to that. We've got someone who's clearly standing in a, the it could be a castle, it could be like a palace type thing. It looks as though it's like they're very well off and they're standing in a very well established, prominent place in the land. They're literally holding the world in the palm of their hands, and they're looking out over the land. Okay, now Dominion is it's about ruling. So you can kind of see how potentially that Dominion is exactly what Pixie was depicting when she drew this card. Okay. If we move on to the Three of Wands, so the Golden Dawn key phrase is the Lord of Established Strength. And right away, I think we can see that, and again in Pixie's depiction, we see someone who's standing again on this kind of a higher position, and this to me looks as though they're looking out over water and there's ships that are being sent out. So this to me is someone who sent these ships out. That's all of the work that they've put in, that those ships represent, and they're going out to all sorts of places. So these ships represent that person's established strength, you know. And almost like even like their kind of a positioning up on the high ground, almost works into that as well. Crowley, I feel as though Crowley's went in a bit of a different direction here because he's key phrased this virtue. Now, virtue, it's more about kind of your morals and stuff. I did look up an actual meaning. So, behaviour and showing high moral standards. The virtue is the quality of being morally good. So to me, that's quite different from established strength, and it's quite different from maybe what we see here. It's maybe talking about inner strength. It maybe kind of takes the idea of established strength and turns it inwards. So if you're, you know, a strong person, then you might be said to be virtuous. That's maybe how that relates to this. And we can see how this relates to that, but with them both going in different directions, you could they're somewhat different, aren't they? Let's move on to the four. So the Golden Dawn key phrase here is the Lord of Perfected Work. Um, and completion is Crowley's key phrase. I can see that Pixie was. We can see that this structure that's being created. It looks like it's finished. These two look they're maybe celebrating the completion of the project. So I I think that these tie in reasonably well together. Um, 5, we have the Lord of Strife. Crowley also uses the keyword strife, and I think this it's pretty obvious that that's what Pixie was depicting. We see these characters, they're in competition with each other, or they're fighting with each other. There's definitely strife being shown there. 6, the Lord of Victory. Crowley uses the keyword victory, and this to me is all, we see the victory wreath. I think this speaks for itself. This is pretty obviously a victory card, or at least that's how it's traditionally read. 7, the Lord of Valor, and again, Crowley sticks to that key phrase of valor. Pixie's showing someone who, again, we see this high ground. So we see someone on the high ground and we see them fending off many opponents, is what it looks like to me. So valor to me is about bravery. It's about showing strength, being brave. And I think we definitely see that here. The Eight of Wands is the Lord of Swiftness, and again, Crowley uses swiftness as well. I think we can definitely get the idea of swiftness from these 8 wands flying through the air. I think lots of us do use that, still to this day, do use that interpretation of swiftness for this card. The 9. So we have the Lord of Great Strength as the Golden Dawn key phrase. Crowley just uses strength as the keyword. And we can definitely get strength from this card. I maybe interpret it more as like a defensive type of card. They've built up this kind of a strong defense. And we also, we can see that this person's been through a lot, that they've been through many fights before. But undoubtedly, we see someone who has shown great strength. They've been through the mill and they're still standing there ready to defend their land. So definitely get the idea of great strength there. And then finally, the Golden Dawn key phrase for the Ten of Wands is the Lord of Oppression. And Crowley takes the word oppression as well. Now, I think we normally tend to read this as burden. But again, this is a situation where I can actually see that potentially what Pixie was trying to depict as someone who is oppressed by all of this, by everything that they have to do, all of the work that they have to do. Possibly this is someone who's been forced to do this work, clearly don't look happy. They're clearly taking on a lot more than what they maybe should be. So there could be oppression here. This person could be forced to do this work that they otherwise don't want to do. So I think it's quite interesting that this is like maybe one of the cards where it is quite interesting to look at it through this lens, because it makes us think twice about, right, what was Pixie actually, what did she have in mind when she was depicting this card, We're on to the swords now. So we've got the Two of Swords. So this is the Lord of Peace Restored, according to the Golden Dawn. And Crowley takes the key phrase peace, and here we have this this person balancing the two swords. Now, this is an interesting one because for me, I would normally depict this as a choice that's got to be made. This is someone who is balancing two different sides of an argument, or two different options that they have. And they're trying to make the best choice that they can with the information that they've got. So peace is obviously quite different. Does this look like Pixie was trying to depict peace or peace restored? I'm not really. I personally don't see it. But maybe someone else with a different viewpoint might see this as peaceful. I don't know. Holding two weapons in your hand, your eyes covered up. I don't really see how that could be seen as peace. So this is maybe one of the cards where I'm thinking Pixie was maybe going on, or Pixie and or Wait, going off in maybe their own direction on this one. But that's just my viewpoint, obviously. The Three of Swords, the Lord of Sorrow, Sorrow in the Thoth as well. And the swords through the heart, we can see how that could easily be depicted as sorrow. I think this is quite an obvious one. If we move on, the Lord of Rest from Strife is the Golden Dawn. Crowley calls this truce. I think that's, there's nothing inconsistent there. Calling a truce on the battle, a temporary ceasefire, rest from strife, that all kind of ties in with me, and I definitely think that ties in with what Pixie was depicting. This does look like someone who is resting from the battle, and that tends to be how I read this card as well. Moving on to the five, Lord of Defeat, defeating the Thoth, and I think that again, nothing really much to say there. It does look like that's what Pixie was depicting. We see this person has obviously defeated these two. Their swords have been thrown down and they're defeated. Six is a very interesting one. So the Lord of Earned Success is the Golden Dawn key phrase. Now, I feel as though they're both almost both going off in their own directions here, because earned success, I don't see it from the Six of Swords. To me, this is To me, this is more like Peace Restored. So we were talking about the two being the Lord of Peace Restored. To me, this looks like more Peace Restored. We're taking ourselves from these choppy waters into a calmer place. Trying to get a bit of mental harmony back. Uh, removing ourselves from the difficulties. Now, sure, you can kind of I suppose you can work around it and say, well, that this person is earning that that piece. They're working for it. They're having to remove themselves, having to work to move that boat, to remove themselves from to that safer place. Um, but I think that I'm reaching a wee bit with that one. So I kind of feel as though Wait and Pixie were going off in their own direction here. As was Crowley, to be honest with you, because he calls this science. Now, this is actually one of my favourite cards in the Thoth. Um, Keyword science. We see six swords that are pointed, that are kind of almost like they're going towards a cross, a crucifix, and this makes me think of it's like thoughts, logical thoughts. Empiricism is attacking religion. You know. Now, Crowley view like whether thought Crowley was whether Crowley thought that science was the good guy in that battle, science versus religion. Whether Crowley was on the side of science or whether he was on the side of religion, who knows? But I do kind of like the idea of the Six of Swords as using empiricism, using your thoughts and your logic, to to question these different ideas. um we always need to be discerning, and we need to always be looking for proof of things. And I say that as someone who reads tarot quite regularly, who's read tarot for most of my life. uh I still think that we need to have an inner skeptic, and we need to always be questioning things. So yeah, that's how I tend to read this card. Do I think that relates to earned success? Not really. Do I think that this relates to this idea of removing yourself to a calmer place? Probably not. But I do really like all of these different ideas of the Six of Swords. The seven, so Lord of Unstable Effort. Um, Crowley calls this futility, and I think that that's quite in keeping with the Golden Dawn. That this idea that your efforts are futile. What you're doing isn't really making an impact. Now, we tend to see this, I think, as a dishonesty card. But at the same time, I can see how Pixie could have been trying to depict this unstable effort, because this person's obviously, they've got all of these swords in their hands now. He's holding the swords by the blades, okay? So a bit of a dangerous, stupid thing to be doing. But also you can see that he's not very successful. He's already dropped two, and how many more is he going to drop by the time he gets back to wherever he's going? So you can actually see that this is a bit of an unstable effort. That his endeavours might be somewhat futile. So I think that these are actually quite consistent, although they might not appear to be at first, just because of how we generally tend to look at this card. Um, so I think this was quite an interesting one to think about in this way. The Eight of Swords, the Lord of Shortened Force. Crowley calls this interference, so I get that. Like, shortened force is, it's almost like someone is shortening your force. Someone is interfering with your efforts, with your energy, with your endeavours, and is stopping you from being able to have that full impact that you would otherwise have. We can kind of get that idea from what Pixie was depicting. Now, again, this might not be where we would normally go when we look at this, when we look at Pixie's card, but if we think about it, this person has been tied up. It almost looks like someone has tried to, almost barricade them in with swords, maybe. Um, so their force has very much been shortened. You know, someone has interfered with this person. Um, so again, I think potentially this was what Pixie was trying to depict. Or not trying. This was what Pixie had in her head when she was, you know, when she was painting this image. The Nine of Swords. So this is the Lord of Despair and Cruelty. Um, Crowley takes the keyword cruelty. I probably get despair more from Pixies, just because we tend to see this as the kind of this is a card for me that looks as though it's full of anxiety and worry and nightmares and all that kind of a thing. Um, so the Golden Dawn, obviously, despair and cruelty were two kind of a concepts that they kind of a pack into this card. Um, Crowley's taken that keyword of cruelty, so he's went more on the cruelty side. Um, Despair and cruelty to me are two quite different things, really. So it's interesting that the Golden Dawn have put these into one card because to me they should be they're two different concepts. Um, but yeah, I almost think that they've that both of these creators have gone and one's went with despair and one's went with cruelty. Makes you wonder, like, like have did they draw for them? Did they decide who gets what? Um, I'm only joking. I know that's not what happened, but and then the Ten of Swords is the Lord of Ruin. Ruin is the key words here, and we can definitely see ruin in Pixie's depiction. So I don't think any more needs to be said. We move on to the cups for the two. I don't think much needs to be said. The Lord of Love, love is the key words here, and that I can see that this is what Pixie was depicting. Here we see this couple coming together. The Lord of Abundance is the Three of Cups, and again, Crowley takes the keyword abundance, and here we see the abundance. Now, I tend to see this as a kind of a partying, celebrating type card, but actually, if you look at everything that Pixie's depicted, this is quite interesting because looking at it through this lens made me look at the whole depiction. I don't normally tend to see all of the abundance that she's depicted at the bottom of the card, but I can definitely see that was what she was again what she had in mind when she was depicting it, when she was illustrating it. Right. So the Four of Cups is the Lord of Blended Pleasure. Um, so I looked up in the Hermetic Tarot, the Little White Book, really, what kind of a suggested meanings it gives for this. And it suggests that this is like pleasure coming to an end, or taking the good with the bad. So there is some pleasure, but there's also some displeasure in it as well. And I think we can definitely see that in Pixie's depiction. We can see that this person has had this abundance, in the three cups there. We can see they're being offered something else, but we tend to depict this as their kind of it's almost like they've been put off. They've had too much and now they've sickened themselves of it. Crowley thinks of this as a luxury card, which is, I suppose, which is quite different from the idea of blended pleasure. Uh, Luxury just suggests, more of that kind of abundance idea. I can actually kind of see, like if you just look at the surface level of it, we've got someone who's had three drinks already and they're being offered another one, so they're kind of just like kind of sitting under a tree, relaxing. It seems to be a reasonably nice day. You can get luxury from that as well. Um, so yeah, I think when you take this out of it, when you look at these next to each other, we might tend to go off in different directions when we come to interpreting them in a reading. But in actual fact, I do think that they're probably more similar. They probably come from a very similar place. Um, Right, 5, the Lord of Loss and Pleasure. So loss and pleasure, Crowley calls it disappointment. I think they're quite consistent. They pretty much mean the same thing, don't they? Um, and I can see that, Pixies in Pixie's depiction, we do also see someone who's looks disappointed, their head's down, they almost look like they're in mourning. I tend to see this as a bit of a kind of a loss card, bereavement, like emotional upset. Um, but you can definitely see those kind of that same concept reverberated in all three cards. For the Six of Cups, we have the Lord of Pleasure, and pleasure is Crowley's keyword. Um, Now, I'm not sure if that's what Pixie had in mind. To me, there are maybe other ways that we might think to depict pleasure. But I mean, we have someone who's young, who's smelling the flowers, who's enjoying the kind of a natural pleasures, I suppose, that life has to offer. So maybe it is what she was depicting. Um, I suppose this deck was illustrated in the 1909 and before, so um, maybe you wouldn't be wanting to depict some of those other ideas of pleasure back in that day. So for the 7, we have the Lord of Illusionary Success, was the Golden Dawn key phrase. I definitely think we get that in Pixie's depiction. I think it's quite interesting that we have the person in silhouette here. And it's almost like the spotlight is being shone on all of these cups. This feels very dreamy to me. It almost looks as though the person's having a dream, or maybe like a daydream, where they're fantasizing about all of the possibilities, all of this kind of a success and abundance that's been presented to them in their dreams. Um, but you really do get that kind of a illusionary aspect to it. Now, Crowley uses the key phrase debauch um, for this card. Now, obviously, we've kind of I'm sure everyone has a place that their mind goes to when you say debauch, but I'm just going to get it up here again. So the meaning. So extreme indulgence in bodily pleasures, especially sexual pleasures. Okay, so that's kind of what what I think about when someone says debauchery or debauch. But there was something else that I saw. Um, it's basically like only looking at the surface. Oh, there it's there. So debauch, destroy or debase the moral purity of, to corrupt, a bout of excessive indulgence in sex, alcohol, and drugs. So this idea of destroying the moral purity of something. Um, so for me, I'm kind of like, well, it's almost like you're taking the meaning out of something and you're only looking at the surface of it. You know, you're. I don't know if I'm kind of going off in too much of a tangent. Um, but the point that I'm making is we could like when we see debauch, it doesn't have to be about like like sex, drugs, and alcohol. You know, it can be basically just only appreciating the surface level of things. And when I look at it like that, I can kind of see it through, I can kind of see how it would relate to this idea of illusionary success. But I do think that he's kind of off on a bit of on his own direction. Um, for of uh, the 8 of Cups, we have the Lord of Abandoned Success. We definitely, I think, see that in Pixie's depiction. We see someone who, they've got all their cups lined up and they're abandoning them. They're going off on a journey or going off in another direction. Um, Now, Crowley calls this indolence. Indolence is avoidance of activity or exertion or laziness. So again, I almost feel that this is Crowley going off on a direction, on a different direction, rather than I think Pixie's depiction is probably quite in keeping with the idea of the Golden Dawn abandoned success. So yeah, the 9, we have the Lord of Material Happiness. Crowley just calls it happiness. And I think we definitely get that here. We have this guy, he's quite pleased with himself. He's got his everything he could want. He's got his 9 cups lined up behind him. So the dogs are barking in the background. They've probably someone's had the audacity to walk down the main road outside, because that's theirs. 10, we have the Lord of Perfected Success. Crowley calls this satiety. And again, it's more this idea about success and happiness, and I think we definitely get that from Pixie's depiction. So not much to be said there. We're on to the final suit. We are at 30 minutes, but I think it'd be silly to stop now, so let's keep going. So for the 2, we have the Lord of Harmonious Change. And Crowley just takes change from that. Now, it's interesting because pictorially we have this, this lemniscate and the 2 discs or pentacles, in the middle there. So it's quite interesting that we see that imagery across all 3 cards. I don't know about you, but I don't normally interpret Pixie's image as change, and I would find it quite difficult to see how this could be about change. To me, this is more about juggling the different things that life throws at you, balancing things. It's more about balance and, keeping all the plates spinning to me than about change. That's just my interpretation of this image. I just can't see how she's trying to depict change with that. But obviously Crowley and the Golden Dawn are quite they're in keeping with each other there. So I almost feel that Pixie's maybe gone off in her own direction a wee bit with this one, but maybe that's just the way I'm looking at it. So this is the Lord of Material Works, or Lord of Material Work. Crowley calls it works, and I definitely think we can see material work from this card, from Pixie's depiction. We see someone almost like someone's building something. So yeah, I don't think there's much more to be said there for the 3. For the 4 of Pentacles, we have the Lord of Earthly Power, and Crowley just calls this power. And we see, this person's got a crown, so this is potentially like a king who's almost like surrounding himself with these pentacles with all these earthly goods. So, and he looks as though he's wearing quite, refined clothing and stuff. So I can, and is he sitting on a throne? I'm not sure, but I can definitely see how this guy's all about his earthly power. So I think that potentially is what Pixie was depicting when she drew this card. For the 5, the Lord of Material Trouble. Crowley calls this worry. It's interesting, right? Because worry to me is more of like the emotional impact, the emotional reverberation that this situation might have on you. So to me, worry is more of like a cups thing. So I think it's quite interesting that he's chosen to call this worry. Now, I think it totally applies because I think that anyone in this situation with material trouble is going to worry. Yeah. But it's just interesting that we see that in the discs suit. But material trouble, I think we can totally, see that that's what Pixie is depicting there. On to the 6. The Lord of Material Success, and Crowley just calls this success. Now, we do see someone who is successful, but I feel as though if that was just all Pixie was trying to depict, she would probably have just stopped there. But this is really quite, she's chosen to depict these other people, um, these look what looks to me to be homeless people, and she's chosen to depict this person, you know, giving to the homeless, donating, charity, being charitable. And she's also chosen to depict them with the scales. Um, so I think that there's a lot to this card, and I might be wrong, but I think in 78 Degrees of Wisdom, Rachel Pollock talks about this being one of the gates, one of the gate cards. I think there's a hell of a lot going on here. Um, and it's interesting because we know that when Pixie was painting these cards, she wasn't paid a lot of money. Um, or we certainly know that she doesn't think that she was paid very much because we've seen that letter where she says she painted 78 images for very little money. So I think that it's really interesting that we see this person who apparently has a lot, is very kind of a successful, but we see them being very measured about how much they're giving out. So I think Pixie was definitely doing something there that's more than just what the Golden Dawn had in mind, and potentially it had a lot to do with what she was going through at that time. Yeah, I'm just speculating, let me just say. I've got no basis for saying that other than just looking at these images, but yeah, I think it's really interesting. The Seven of Pentacles, or the Seven of Discs. So Golden Dawn, this is the Lord of Success Unfulfilled. Crowley calls this failure. Success, unfulfilled, failure, I don't think they're too far apart. Now, this is one of these ones where I think generally these days we tend to see this as a card about like return on investment. You put in the work and you get out, what you put into it. But so that's obviously quite different. Our interpretation of this image, I think these days is quite different from, the Golden Dawn key phrase and, the way Crowley depicted it. However, I can actually see that potentially Pixie was trying to depict exactly, not, I keep saying trying to depict, and I don't mean it that way. I mean, she was depicting success unfulfilled, or failure. Because we see someone who's obviously putting in a hell of a lot of work and they're clearly a little bit fed up. Um, all of these pentacles are still kind of in the, they're not ready to be harvested yet. There's only one pentacle that they've actually been able to get out of the lot. So they've put in all this work, 7 pentacles worth of work, but they've only actually got one out of it all. So to me, that is success unfulfilled. That is almost like, I wouldn't want to call it failure, but it's like you've put in all that work and that's all you've got out of it. It's almost like the rewards wasn't worth the work that you put into it. That doesn't tend to be how I interpret that card, or at least it's interesting because now that I've kind of looked at it that way, I think that is starting to work its way into my readings that I do. But certainly that's not how I would have interpreted that card up until now. But the more I think about it, the more I think that is what Pixie was depicting. So, interesting. The Eight of Pentacles. So, we have the Lord of Prudence, and that is what Crowley calls it too, prudence. So, prudence is like, to me, is like being overly careful. Um, being overly careful, being really measured about kind of what you're doing. And I don't really get that from Pixie's Eight of Pentacles at all. To me, this is someone who's working hard. You could maybe say they're being very prudent about, there may be a bit of perfectionism going on here. So they're doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it and doing it until they get it right. So I can definitely get an element of perfectionism from the Eight of Pentacles from Pixie's image, which I suppose you could say is a form of prudence, but I don't get the general concept of prudence from this. I think this is more about work and, you know, perfected work. For the 9, the Lord of Material Gain, and Crowley just calls this gain, and I think it goes without saying we can definitely see that from this image, and I think that does tend to be how most of us interpret that image these days. And finally, the 10 of Pentacles, the Lord of Wealth. Crowley is taking the image of wealth. So this is another one where I can definitely see that Pixie is depicting wealth. We see these people in like nice clothing. We see you know a very established estate. This is a kind of a very um clearly a very kind of a wealthy estate. There's lots of money being put into it. A lovely property, all of that kind of thing. So we definitely get this idea of wealth. We can even see the family unit, and the wealth has been passed down as well. Um, the thing is though, we have these people, these younger, what appears to be the younger folks, as being very separate from this older man. Now, I don't know if I'm seeing this because Rachel Pollock in 78 Degrees of Wisdom talks about the story of Odysseus. Um, he goes away for years and comes back, and only his dogs recognize him. And it's like the family are so caught up in their own stuff they've got going on that they don't even recognize the person that's brought them all of this success and power and wealth and stuff. Um, so that's a kind of a different layer that I can see in this picture, but I don't know if I'm only seeing that because Rachel's kind of pointed it out. I don't know if that's what Pixie was trying to depict, but you can definitely see there seems to be a somewhat of a separation between the older generation and the younger generation here. And they do very much seem to be kind of a caught up on their own stuff, and he's just happy with his dogs. So I don't know if Pixie was trying to depict more here. Like there it is again, trying to depict. I don't know if Pixie was depicting more than just the idea of wealth here. I think that there's a lot of meaning packed into this card, and again, it could be that that's to do with the kind of a stuff that she was going through at the time when she was painting these images. But uh, but yeah, interesting stuff. So that's us. We've done the 2s through 10s. Now, I'm not sure whether I'm going to do another one of these. It was really the keywords that I was that I was interested in looking at, and looking at how they affect how we look at Pixie's images. Um, I think it's been a really interesting. There's some of the cards, particularly that 6 of Pentacles. Actually, I mean, even that's given me food for thought, and just since I've been doing this video, um, really made me think about what the stuff that she was going through at the time, because you can see how much more she's layered into this card than just that idea of being successful, um, and you wonder how much of that has come from the place that she was in when she was doing this. Um, Definitely food for thought. I hope that you've enjoyed this. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'd be really interested in seeing what everybody else's thoughts are on this kind of a thing. What else do you see in these images when you look at it through this lens? Thanks so much for watching. Take care, everyone. I'll see you all later. Bye bye.